one of the things I like about this story is that it's so real. Have you ever run into someone and they unexpectedly talked to you, and then they start talking like stuff that you don't want to talk about, and then you change the topic, and you change the topic, and you're trying to get out of it, and then they say something that strikes you, and that's what's going on in this scenario. Jesus is at the well at noon. Normally, when you're going, if Jesus set his GPS, he would set it so that it has no roads through Samaria. You can set your GPS so you go no tolls, right? No highways. Jesus would say no Samaria, because every Jew didn't go through Samaria. It was a straight line from where Jesus was going to where he was ending up, except Samaria was in the middle. So normal Jews go around Samaria because they hated Samaritans. Jesus decides to go through, despite what the disciples want, despite what the customs of the day are. He's just going straight through. He's going into this area, and he sits down at this well, and this well was like, when you talk about Jacob and Joseph, you're talking about Jacob, the one who became Israel, right? Jacob, who wrestled with God. Jacob wrestled with God, and he became, God renamed him Israel, and that's who Israel, the nation Israel, is actually named after, Jacob. So this was his well. It was like big time, holy spot. So Jesus comes and he sits by the well, and this woman comes out at noon, which was unexpected because it's hot, and you're not going to draw water at noon. Why would you do that? You'd go in the morning. But everybody goes in the morning, and she wanted to avoid everybody apparently, so she went at noon. So Jesus is sitting there, and she comes up, and then a dialogue starts. She's like, "Why are you even talking to me? Don't talk to me." And the conversation continues, and then they start arguing about like mundane stuff, like who's going to win the Super Bowl? How's the weather? Oh, yeah, you Jews, you guys worship in Jerusalem, you tell us all this stuff, and this is where we worship, blah, 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 blah. And Jesus starts talking to her, and eventually they get to the point where they get down to the nitty-gritty, and Jesus is like, "Hey, I know who you are, and I know what you're about, and I'm still willing to come here and talk to you." And somehow the story goes on, but I'll get to that in the end. So here's the deal: we're doing this sermon series on the one commandment we have as Christians, and that's to love others. And Jesus goes on and says, "As you've been loved." So we talked about love, and we talked about how love others is a command from Jesus because he's the Messiah and God incarnate, and he just tells us this is what we're supposed to do. We talk about love as a suggestion from Jesus because if you love others, it makes life better. And then we talked about it as it's a promise too, because if you love others, like when you love others, especially others that are tough to love, it just requires something of you. And sometimes we wonder how much we have left to give. But the promise of God in love others is that God will continue to fill you and to continue to restore you and continue to give you everything you need. And the more you give, the more God will give you. So you never run out. And then last week we talked about one simple principle about love. And love is a choice, right? Love has to be a choice. You can't be forced to love. And we talked. I talked really fast last week. I felt like I was talking really fast last week because I was covering everything from creation, the way that we were created, and how we're created to be in relationship, and how to be in genuine relationship, you have to be able to love. But in order to love, you have to have a choice not to love because you can't be forced to love, right? And the choice not to love is other than love, and that ends up as sin. And that was the point of the tree in the garden, and that was the point of the serpent, and that was the point of you and me in our life. We have choices all the time. I have choice. I can sit there. I talked last week. I could sit there and binge 6 hours of The Office and totally ignore my wife and family, or I can choose to not do that and to engage in them and love them and do things with them and participate in a relationship with them. Right? We have choices all the time. Love is a choice. This week, I have a very simple principle for you from this story. This passage is preached in so many different ways, and it's so rich with meaning. You could read this like every day and get a different nugget out of it. What I want to share with you this morning about love is one thing. And then I'll give you 3 points to the one thing, but one thing. You ready? Love requires you to deal with your own stuff. You have an incredible, every one of you here this morning has an incredible capacity to love and love incredibly. But if you're really, really honest, you got stuff that you got to deal with that holds you back from loving the way God intended you to love. That's the challenge. For us to love others sometimes. Sometimes that choice, right? Love is a choice. Sometimes that choice is so polluted and corrupted by our own lust, by our own anger, by our own frustration, by our own impatience, by our own stuff, by our own hurts and pains, that it becomes impossible for us to make the choice that God calls us to. That it becomes impossible for us to love the way that God has equipped us to love. And that's a tough, tough journey. Sometimes it requires medical experts, doctors. Sometimes it requires professional help from counselors and therapists and psychologists. Sometimes it requires a friend to know what's going on so they can walk with you through the fire and through the challenge. But the bottom line is I want to encourage you, and we'll talk about this story in a couple minutes and what Jesus was doing with this woman to transform her. But I want to encourage you to just take a good, honest look at yourself. And start to deal with the stuff. You know, and some stuff is like an onion. I've had stuff in my life where 15 years, I'm like 140, so you got to keep that in perspective. Like 15 years ago, I started to deal with something that surfaced because of certain stressors that came into my life, you know? Certain stuff brings up memories and stirs up stuff. And I dealt with it at one level, but 15 years before that, I was dealing with it at a different level. Because God works in your life in ways that the offer is there to heal. Or the offer is there to grow through your anger or your lust or your greed or whatever it is. Sometimes the stuff that holds us back is sin, like anger, greed, lust, the 7 deadly sins. Sometimes the stuff that holds us back is stuff that we've been traumatized with, that was done to us. And it's not your fault, but it impacts you. and you can deal with it. And here's why. This is the good news. If you want to love at a deeper capacity and you're willing to start to look at the stuff or engage with how God is unfolding it and unpacking it in your life as you get older and as you grow, here's the thing. Jesus didn't go around Samaria. He took he discarded all of the bias, all of the rules. He went right through the issue. And he sat there and waited. Whatever the taboos are about your stuff, Jesus walks right through them. And he sits down right in the middle. And he says, "Here I am." And the woman, so there's nothing that he will not engage with you on. Regardless of how bad, regardless of how screwed up it is, regardless of anything, he is willing to walk right through the boundaries and the borders to heal you. And the second thing in this story that's crystal clear, right, is he engages with the woman. He says, "Look, you don't know in the beginning when he says, 'Hey, can I have a drink of water?' You don't know that in his head he knows that she had 5 husbands and she's living with a guy and she's a mess, and she's out there at noon because she's frowned in society and in the community, and they don't like her, and they know who she is, and it's her situation. And he knew all of that stuff about her, and when she came out, he engaged with her. He said, "Hey, can I have a drink?" The universal truth is that whatever it is that you need to deal with, Jesus is willing to address it. That's the universal truth. He's willing to help you with it. The individual truth, the truth for me personally, for you personally, for this woman, is he's going to address it in a way that you can engage with him on it. He didn't see the woman coming up and say, You're a harlot, you've had 5 husbands, and you're living with some guy, now give me a drink. He engaged with her. He bantered with her about worship. He talked with her until he knew in her heart she was ready to hear that he knew all about her, and he was still there with her. He was not going to leave. And he was willing to help her. So the universal truth is, absolutely, Jesus can help you with whatever your stuff is. The personal love of Jesus says that in this story is that he will do it in a way that you can handle it. It might hurt. It might be difficult. But he's there with you, and he'll help you through it. He'll help you engage with it, with your own stuff. Last point, and today's short, so next week I get to preach longer. Last point. The story goes on after this. Jesus sent the disciples for like some McDonald's or something because it was lunchtime and they were hungry. But I think it was all intentional so that he could be with her one-on-one, soul to soul. Because when we deal with our stuff, sometimes that's what we need to deal with. That's how we need to deal with it. He got her to the point where something, and the text is very brief. It doesn't tell us well, Jesus did this and he laid hands on her and then the Spirit of God came down and transformed her on the spot and she even looked different. She glowed like Moses glowed when she saw. No, it doesn't tell us how the change happened. But what it does tell us is that through this interaction with Jesus, through the open and honest situation in which he was dealing with her pain and her shame and her sin, in that, what happened is her life was transformed, her heart was transformed, her soul was redeemed. That's the good news of Jesus Christ, right? It's about redemption. The cross and the empty tomb together is a story of where God takes death itself and turns it into life. Those areas in your life that were either inflicted upon you or that you've caused yourself, that those areas of death and decay and hurt that hold you back from loving the people around you the way that you can because God is so incredible and has given you that capacity. Those areas, they're part of your story. And God can redeem all of that and take something that was dead and turn it into good life. The story goes on that the woman was so transformed that she went back into the city and she told all of the people in the city about this guy that she met out at the well who was the Messiah, who knew everything about her and changed her life. And she said it in such a compelling way that the scriptures tell us, that John tells us, that the whole community came out to see Jesus. And when they saw him, they were all transformed and became followers of Christ. And the whole city changed. All because she was in a situation where Jesus cut through all of the boundaries. He was willing to engage with her and challenge her on her stuff and transform her. And he did it in such a way that it had an overflow to the whole community. You know, we live in our houses with children or with parents, with spouse, or we live in places that need transformation. We live in a town that needs transformation. We live in a community with schools that need transformation. We live in workplaces that need transformation. I don't know about you, but I need transformation. And I look to God every day. And I ask God to some of you know my one of my favorite prayers is, God, get me where you want me without too much pain. And God has honored that. And every day it's a new unraveling and a new thing being revealed. So don't be afraid to address your stuff. Because as hard as it might be, God can redeem it in a way that transforms everything. You, your family, your community, your workplace, our schools. So don't be afraid. He'll break the boundaries. He'll get to you. He'll be there for you and engage with you. And he can take anything that's holding you back from loving those around you, loving others, and redeem it in a way that transforms you and everything else.